Welcome to the Path of Wellness podcast, the show devoted to teaching anything and everything in the realm of Chinese medicine and how following the principles of this ancient way of healing can help you live your best, healthiest life. Hosted by licensed acupuncturist and herbalist Nicole Barrios, this show is on a mission to mainstream Chinese medicine, to take the mystery out of it, and to help it be considered as a first line of defense for maintaining health and well-being. From interviews to FAQs to tips and tricks, there will always be something new to learn and apply to your life. So join us on the journey and discover your own personal path of wellness. Welcome back to another episode of the Path of Wellness podcast, the show that helps to take the mystery out of Chinese medicine. And this is going to be the first episode in an ongoing series that I'm calling Ask an Acupuncturist. It's kind of self-explanatory what this is going to be about. I get a lot of the same questions over and over as an acupuncturist, and I thought that it was just kind of time I compiled my answers into one location so that I could easily guide people to just, listen to this podcast episode or check out my YouTube channel so that you can get a more in-depth answer than I can give any one person in just a few seconds. So with that, welcome to the first episode of my Ask an Acupuncturist segment. For this episode, I'm going to cover probably the number one question that I get from people, and that is, does acupuncture hurt? So before I kind of get into this, I do need to, for anybody who doesn't know what acupuncture is, it involves the insertion of needles, tiny needles, into certain points along the body to elicit a healing response. So usually when people hear acupuncture, they hear the word needles and they automatically panic. Like, why would I allow anybody to stick needles in me willingly when it's not a shot or a blood draw? And most people don't like shots or blood draws either. And so, people have maybe heard about the benefits of acupuncture and they kind of want to try it, but they can't get past the needle part because they're afraid of needles. And because they're basically wondering, is this going to hurt me? Am I going to get acupuncture and just be in pain the whole time? And I don't have a high pain tolerance, that sort of thing. And so my answer to that is, I guess it's not one definitive answer. Like, it's not just a straightforward, yes, it hurts, or no, it doesn't hurt, because there's a lot of factors involved in this. But what I can say just up front is that it shouldn't hurt. If acupuncture hurts, either your practitioner doesn't know what they're doing or they're going out of their way to make it uncomfortable for you. There are some practitioners and also some patients who want to feel pain. There's like a weird, I think it's weird because I don't like causing pain in people, especially when people are coming to me because they want to be out of pain. But I am not a fan of doing acupuncture on people in a way that hurts. I like to make it as comfortable and as painless as possible. And some people believe that if it doesn't hurt, it's not going to help. That has not been my experience in over 8 years of practice, and however many years I was in student clinic on top of that. It doesn't have to hurt in order for it to be effective. And so I guess the answer to the question, does acupuncture hurt? Depending on the practitioner you're seeing, no, it really shouldn't hurt much at all. If people feel anything at all, they usually feel the needle gets put into a plastic guide tube a lot of the time. Some people don't use the guide tube, but it's just a tiny little plastic tube that allows you to guide. It's a guide tube. It allows you to guide the needle exactly where you want it to go at whatever area of the body you're working on. And so usually that's what people feel the most, is they feel that plastic guide tube resting on the skin. But once the needle gets inserted into the skin, it's quick and it's almost always pretty painless. Or if you feel anything at all, it's usually not pain. It might just be like a slight pinch. Sometimes it might feel achy. Sometimes it feels heavy. Sometimes there's like interesting like electrical sensations that you feel, but it's usually not pain. The sensations that people feel when they get the needles inserted during an acupuncture session is usually not pain. It's usually just kind of, if you feel anything, it's usually just kind of weird, almost indescribable. Like, oh, I don't really know what to think about that. Like, it doesn't hurt, but it's just kind of weird. That is normal. Every once in a while, if a needle gets inserted and the technique wasn't done correctly, or the angle wasn't correct or something like that, there might be like a sharp sensation. Again, doesn't necessarily hurt. It just might feel uncomfortable, but usually you can tell like that's a needle. Like I'm feeling a tiny little poke from a needle and it's not subsiding. Then that usually means the practitioner just needs to adjust the needle a little bit, and after that it should subside. But in general, no, acupuncture shouldn't hurt. However, there are a lot of circumstances that can impact a person's experience of acupuncture and how it feels to them. And for instance, the part of the body that the needle is going into could impact how it feels and if it's painful or not. So for example, points, like any acupuncture points that are on the hands or the feet, will probably be a little bit more sensitive just because there's more nerve endings in those areas, and so there's going to be more sensation and more likely to feel something. Not always, and it depends on the person too, because some people are just more sensitive than others for varying reasons. But points where it's like fleshier, like elbows, points around the elbows, points around the knees, points on the back, points on the shoulders, when you're doing needling in those areas, you really don't feel it at all. In fact, a lot of times, especially if you're doing needles on the back, people don't even notice that the needles are in until you tell them. Like some people will ask, like, oh, are the needles in? Like, well, yeah, you're all set. It's time, you're done. So a lot of people are surprised, which is kind of funny. But so that just kind of goes to show that acupuncture really doesn't have to hurt. It shouldn't hurt. Like I said earlier, some people are just more sensitive to acupuncture than others. And in that instance, it still doesn't necessarily hurt sensitive people. They just might notice more sensations. Like, for example, they might notice those weird sensations that I was talking about, like the tingling or the twitching or heaviness. Like they can tell that the acupuncture is doing something to their body. And again, it's not really painful and it's not a bad thing. It's just they're more aware of what is shifting inside their body as a result of the acupuncture needles being in. There's also other factors that can cause a person to be more sensitive to acupuncture. For women in particular, although I do see it in men sometimes, but women are very in tune with this. Women are more prone to be sensitive to acupuncture if it's a full moon, which sounds crazy, but I have observed this over many years that if it's a full moon, practically all of my female patients are not really jumping off the table, but they're just, they definitely notice the needles more on those days. Also for women, if they're menstruating, they're more likely to be sensitive on those days. If a person is in really bad pain, then they're more likely to be sensitive on those days. But then as the acupuncture helps to alleviate like their back pain, for example, and they continue getting treatment, the needles start to feel less sensitive to them, like they don't notice them as much anymore. So there's a lot of factors involved in when a person, like what they feel during acupuncture and when they feel it as well. But one thing that I do like to say to people, especially adults, when they ask, does acupuncture hurt? I am a pediatric acupuncturist. I don't just work on kids, but they are a big part of my practice. And if I can give a child acupuncture, anybody can have acupuncture. So with kids in particular, it depends on the age, like how old they are, and how their mindset is around needles. Some kids just, they don't care at all. They're just like, cool, that looks interesting, I want to try that. And other kids are utterly terrified of having acupuncture done. So what happens with the pediatric demographic is I use the tiniest needles you could imagine. They're so small you can barely see them. They have like a plastic handle on them. It's usually like a bright color so that you can actually see the handle, so that you know that you're holding a needle, but you have to like hold it up to the light to even see the needle because they're so super tiny. I use really, really small needles on kids. I always do a full demonstration for kids so that they can see what it looks like. We also try to avoid using the word needle or acupuncture with kids because it tends to freak them out. So because the needles get tapped into the skin, we just call them taps. So instead of saying, hey, you're gonna have acupuncture today, it's like, oh, we're gonna try taps because we tap it in. That definitely helps. It helps to take the stigma out of the whole needle thing. So usually what I kind of have to coach the parents on this in advance before they bring their child in for acupuncture. And again, it depends on the age. Teenagers are usually easier about this. It's kind of like the ages 6 to 10 age range that they are more likely to be freaked out about the needle thing. So that's when we call them taps and do the full demonstration and allow them to decide whether or not they want to try it. And usually what happens is I'll get their permission to do one point around the elbow because, as I said earlier, the elbow is a less sensitive area of the body. And we'll do the tap in there with my super teeny tiny needles, and they most of the time don't feel anything, but they're watching the whole time, so they can see it, so they know that there's a needle sticking out of them, and they're mostly just surprised and curious. They'll look at it and be like, I don't understand, like I saw you put that in and I know that it's there, but I don't feel it. So it doesn't have to be painful. And also there's different styles of acupuncture that the practitioner can do, different techniques, and different styles and gauges of needles that can make the experience even more comfortable for people. So I use extra tiny needles for kids and a slightly thicker gauge for adults, mostly because it's easier for me to handle just with my fingers. Like it's easier for me to handle the slightly thicker gauge needles. And they're slightly less expensive too. The really, really thin needles they're not super cost effective, but they're so much more comfortable for the kids that it's more than worth it for me to get them. But if I have an adult client who is really, really sensitive, I will totally bust out the kid needles. And usually me just saying like, this is what I use on my pediatric clients usually puts them at ease, like this, oh, if a kid can do this, I can totally do this too. So that's kind of my long-winded answer of, does acupuncture hurt? It shouldn't. It can in certain demographics or populations, or depending on where the moon is or how you're feeling that day. And even then, it still doesn't hurt. It just might feel weird, sometimes uncomfortable. Every once in a while, there might be a point that does hurt. In all my years of practice, gosh, I feel like I've only ever had to remove a needle from somebody because it pained them, and I've given thousands of treatments. So just to put this into perspective, thousands of treatments, I've probably had to remove less than 10 needles. So I don't know what the math on that works out to, but it's a really, really, really tiny percentage of people that acupuncture hurts, at least in my practice. I can't vouch for other practitioners and for their style of acupuncture, and if anybody else is hurting patients, but I actually want my patients to come back because acupuncture is more effective when you get it consistently, like exercise. And because of that, I don't want to hurt people because I want them to be comfortable and to enjoy the experience. and to be able to relax enough so they can actually get the full benefit from the treatment. And in order to do that, they need to not be worried about being in pain. So that is my answer to that question. If that is not clear at all, let me know. I will totally do another episode. I could talk about acupuncture all day until I'm blue in the face. This has been pretty much my whole life for well over a decade now. So I love talking about this stuff. And yeah, I would love to hear whatever other questions you guys might have about acupuncture, about Chinese medicine. I've already got a huge list of questions that I answer all the time. And yeah, I'm always open to hearing more and being able to help you guys understand this medicine better, to take the mystery out of it so that it is thought of more as a first line of defense for people, instead of something that people use as a last resort, or something that people don't even consider as an option to help them get better. And if worried about pain and needles is a factor in whether or not somebody gets acupuncture or is even willing to try it, hopefully this episode here helps to debunk that a little bit. Like, it doesn't have to hurt in order for it to be effective, and it shouldn't hurt. And if you're with the right practitioner who has a gentle style, and especially if somebody works with kids, they know how to make it as painless as possible. So that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you for listening, and I hope this helps, and I'll catch you guys